Welcome to Monday of the Passion Week. You know, it's important to understand that the events that unfolded on Monday really began on Sunday. In the triumphal entry, Jesus led, you remember, that wonderful parade into the city in which he was proclaimed king by his followers. Having entered the city, he then went directly to the temple. And Scripture is clear that he intentionally surveyed everything that was happening at the temple. And it's that really forms the foundation for what happens on Monday. Two main events occur on Monday of the Passion Week. You'll read about them, you'll be struck with their significance, but you need to be aware of their meaning. The first is the cursing of the fig tree. As Jesus leaves the town of Bethany, just 2 miles over the hill from Jerusalem and from the Temple Mount, he comes upon a fig tree, and he's hungry. I love that, because the fact that he's hungry shows his real humanity. He was just like us except for sin. And he comes upon this fig tree that has all its leaves. Now, that indicated that it should already have had small green figs. It wasn't yet the time for ripe figs, but the people often ate the small little green undeveloped figs. So he comes upon this tree, and because it has leaves, he rightly expected that it should have had figs, the little green fig buds that came before the leaves. But when he arrives at the tree, he discovers that there are leaves, but no fruit of any kind, not even the little green unripe figs. So this became the perfect illustration for what was happening at the temple where he was about to go. There were all the leaves, all the show, all the religion, all the ceremony, but there was no real spiritual worship. It was all leaves, no fruit. So to make a point, Jesus curses the fig tree. It really is a powerful indication of his view of first century Judaism and what it had become. And so as he departs from there in the fig tree, probably around the city of Bethpage, which ironically means house of figs, he heads over the Mount of Olives and down to the Temple Mount. And when he gets to the Temple Mount, the second major event on Monday unfolds. For the second time in his ministry, he cleanses the temple. You'll remember that early in his ministry, he had done the same. And now, having assessed it again on Sunday, at the end of his ministry, having surveyed the Temple Mount, having seen all that was happening there, he comes again to cleanse it. Now, why was it necessary for Jesus to cleanse the temple? Well, as it turns out, in the court of the Gentiles, in the area of the temple that was meant for the Gentiles to come and worship, the leaders of the temple, Caiaphas and the high priestly families, had actually established what amounted to a money-making scheme. Initially, this had all been on the Mount of Olives, but under Caiaphas, it had been moved to the Temple Mount itself. And there, you had two major businesses going on. The first of them was a money exchange business. Because the money of the first century was Roman, it had Caesar's image on it. And therefore, they considered it pagan and said it couldn't be used at the temple. So if you were going to buy anything at the temple, you had to first exchange your money in order to use it there. They had decided that the only acceptable money was from Tyre, and so they would exchange the normal pagan Roman money for coins from Tyre. And of course, there was an exchange rate. They kept a percentage, somewhere around 4 to 8 cents on the dollar in contemporary terms. But even now that you had the money from Tyre, you still didn't have what you needed for sacrifice. You took that money that you had exchanged at a loss, and you then bought the necessary sacrifice that maybe you weren't able to bring with you, or perhaps the one that you had brought had been damaged on the way and had been judged by the priest as blemished. And so you needed to buy another sacrificial animal. The problem was the animals sold at the temple were inflated in price. So you were paying more than you would have paid anywhere else for that animal. It truly was a money-making scheme of the highest order. So Jesus comes into that and he overturns the tables. He chases them all away, and he simply won't allow them to use it for those businesses anymore. And that's because he said, my house, my Father's house, is what he says. That's an important way for him to describe the temple. It explains his relationship with the Father, and it also explains the fact that it was intended as the place where God would manifest his presence among his people. Then Jesus says, you've made my Father's house a den of thieves. You're stealing from the people. But it's also interesting that he says this. It was intended to be a house of prayer for all the nations. It's supposed to be not primarily a place of sacrifice. Sacrifice just gets you where you can interact with God, where you can approach God, where you can commune with God. Once you've sacrificed, then you're prepared to worship. And it was a place not only for the Jewish people, Jesus said, but for many of us who are Gentiles, it was a house of prayer for the nations. So as you read Monday's readings, keep this background in mind and see what Jesus is really saying. He's saying what has happened with first century Judaism is no longer fruit. It's just leaves. There's no reality. And he curses the fig tree as an example of that. And then he goes down the Mount of Olives to the Temple Mount, and he cleanses the temple of those who are rendering it completely contrary to God's spiritual purposes.